Okay, so I think we're gonna start. I'll start with a brief welcome, and that will give time for people to like start joining in. Welcome everyone. This is the first CMS Policy Speaker Series of 2022. First of all, I would like to excuse and send along the regards and appreciation from George Hurt, who is the CMS Science Team Lead. Today, we're honored to have Fabian Rith from the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany. He's going to be giving a talk titled Towards the Global Atlas of Nature-Based Solution and Negative Emission Technologies. And there he will highlight a decision support tool for the development of viable climate change mitigation strategies. I just wanted to take a few minutes before moving to the talk to give you some updates, some announcements on the side of CMS applications. First, I would like to remind all of you that you can visit our website, carbon.nasa.gov, for more information on the CMS program, on all of the recently funded CMS projects, and the data products that we have, and also information in our upcoming events. We're just coming from 2 months that we have. 2 months ago, we had the CMS Science Team meeting, we had the CMS Stakeholder Workshop in November, and we had oral and poster sessions in AGU in December. So you can find more information about that in our website. Also, if you have any recommendations for this year on topics, speakers that you would like to see on this policy speaker series, please let me know. Send me that information to my email. We are going to be updating the CMS website. We are uploading a stakeholder relevant content, and we're making it more user friendly. So you can expect those changes to be finalized by the middle or the end of next month in February. Finally, I also wanted to take attention to this Applied Earth
Come on, bud.
Observation Innovation Partnership that we, as part of CMS, that we are part, is a partnership between NASA, U.S. Forest Service, and other federal government agencies with the goal of fostering interagency partnerships to advance Earth observation-based land management. And we're going to be having a workshop, in-person workshop in Charlottesville coming up in the middle of March, and I will be sending more information to our mailing list in the coming days. But also, in preparation for that workshop, we're going to be having a webinar next week on Wednesday, January 26th at 1 p.m. And we're going to be having CMS scientist Lola Fatoyimbo and CMS stakeholder Carl Trettin, and they're going to be talking about the development of mangrove and blue carbon products and its uses and applications. I will be sending the talk announcement to our mailing list later today, and I'll post the website to this partnership on the chat here so you can take a look. So now I don't want to take more time. We're gonna leave 15 to 20 minutes for a Q&A and discussion at the end of Fabian presentation. So without further ado, I leave you all with Fabian. Fabian.
Yeah, many thanks, Edil. And yeah, welcome everybody to my talk today towards the Global Atlas of Nature-Based Solutions and Negative Emission Technologies. Just to give you a brief history, I started this project in 2020 here at Geomar within the Biogeochemical Modeling Group. And we actually got some funding from VW, the car company, because they're currently, as many others, looking for compensation options and asked us to do that. And we got some funding, like 80K. So we had like only 5K available for the technical realization, which is not much money. And then I applied for a knowledge transfer project from the Helmholtz Association here in Germany, and which in the end didn't get funded. But then luckily Carlos Duarte from the King Abdul University of Science and Technology contacted me because he has heard of this initiative, and we agreed on joining forces. And since then have yeah, looked at many ways how to do that. And now we are in the final stage of a collaboration agreement between KAUST and Geomar, which is probably be signed within the next weeks. And once this is signed, the IT management at KAUST will start to set up the platform and we can finally get started. But let me start with a brief motivation. So it's all in the context of the Paris Agreement, which has set the political targets to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, if not at 1.5, and strengthen countries' adaptation capacity in order to prevent dangerous consequences of climate change and ensure sustainable food production and economic development. And this is all to be achieved and maintained in the context of the UN sustainability goals and nature's contribution to people. So how can our climate goals be realized? This figure shows you list from the emission gap report, showing different emission scenarios. And what you see here in 2030, I mean, here's different, the unconditional, conditional NDC, nationally determined contributions. And even if fully realized, they wouldn't be sufficient. And what you already see is here, in order to achieve the 2-degree climate target or 1.5 climate target, there's a huge gap. And the question is, how do we close that gap? This figure shows the median of IPCC IR5 emission scenarios compatible with the 2-degree climate target. And in order to achieve and maintain our climate targets, we need to rapidly reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. We need net zero emissions required from 2050 in order to balance sources and sinks. And what we also see is that we need negative emissions or the removal of CO2 from the atmosphere already from 2030. Negative emissions that need to be achieved until the end of the century are about 670 gigatons of CO2, being all historical emissions of US and China, approximately. Yeah, so negative emissions are necessary to achieve the agreed climate targets. So how do we realize negative emissions? So we need to deliberately remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So, and currently there are like the two categories of options. One is like this nature-based solutions, enhancing natural CO2 sinks, or by technically removing CO2 from the atmosphere and store it somewhere else, such as in geological formations, for example. So currently there's a high need for reliable scientific findings on inventories, potentials and costs, risks, trade-offs and co-benefits for decision makers and economic actors worldwide. Available information until now is very often aggregated on a global level, focuses on individual methods, is sometimes only targeted at the scientific community, mainly text-based, and therefore doesn't allow a spatially differentiated assessment of these various methods being natural or technically based. So in the Atlas, we want to include these nature-based solutions, which aim at decarbonizing the atmosphere, and recarbonizing the biosphere. We'll focus on this as we find that this is more cost-effective and more scalable than technically based methods. Methods we want to include are, for example, reforestation, restoration of peatlands, soil carbon management, but also seagrass meadows, salt marshes, and mangroves, and others. And for nature-based solutions, this is for sure also that, for example, vegetated coastal habitats also promote adaptation to climate change by, for example, avoiding reducing the impacts of sea level rise, in particular by acting on all mechanisms that dissipate wave energy and by contributing to bathymetric changes through sediment accumulation and shoreline accretion, which is key to shoreline protection aside from direct damping of the incoming waves, and thereby reducing losses of assets of urban and non-urban communities and infrastructure. Sorry. So for technical methods, again, it's like deliberately removing CO2 from the atmosphere, and then the question remains, where do you store that? And we want to integrate also this technically based methods or negative emission technologies, abbreviated as NETs, by transferring reliable scientific findings and by synthesizing these with geospatial data layers in order to identify potential deployment sites under an SDG lens for sure. Methods we're going to include are, for example, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, enhanced weathering, and on the marine side, for example, iron fertilization, artificial upwelling, or ocean alkalinization, and others that area such as seaweed or microalgae cultivation. So to summarize kind of the objective of the planned Global MBS and NETS Atlas is to synthesize and geospatially visualize robust scientific findings on mitigation and adaptation potentials, as well as risks, trade-offs, and co-benefits of nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies on a global to local level in a web-based interactive atlas. Target groups include governmental institutions, international organizations, and NGOs that do have an influence on the strategic development of viable climate protection strategies, industry corporations that are in search of verifiable compensation options, and put in brackets here, insurance sector is also very interested, especially in the adaptive capacity. Yeah, maybe get to that later. Benefits are supposed to give support on how to meet naturally determined contributions or find verifiable compensation options, but also for developing adaptation strategies to reduce damage costs and protect bioeconomies. Basic modules of the Atlas include map layers of nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies on a global to local level, concise information text with links to relevant publications, links to existing platforms. So this is really important when talking about synthesizing. So we don't really want to reinvent the wheel. We want to also really synthesize what is out there, link to other platforms, and really try to, bring everything together. And then also there's supposed to be a global overview of relevant projects and best practice examples that may serve as a planning guide. Thereby, we want to provide a necessary decision support platform that enables the spatially differentiated assessment of nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies in the context of the Paris Agreement, in particular with respect to Article 4 and 6. This is a prototype that I have produced with the funding provided by by VW, the car company. Again, was only 5K, so it's not that sophisticated, but has been done by an IT provider in Austria, XNet. And what you see here is in red is the global distribution of salt marshes along the coastline. This is data coming from the UNEP Ocean Data Viewer that I have downloaded and corrected because there are, for example, many countries counted doubled, and so you have to give some time to really have a clean data set. And the idea is then, if you have this global coarse resolution perspective on the global distribution, that you can zoom in, and wherever you have like this high resolution data on a regional to local level, you get then like this information on, for example, area, carbon stocks, carbon storage, but also social cost of carbon. This is data coming from the Wageningen University and research. Unfortunately, this is all in red, but so you could have really categorized stocks and sequestration rates, but we didn't have the time and money to do so, but I hope you get the point here. Again, we don't only want to cover marine, but also terrestrial ecosystems. For negative emission technologies, this is a kind of different approach. I'm working with the Climate Map, that is a US-based nonprofit in New York that develops end-to-end pathways of negative emission technologies, meaning, for example, with respect to mineralization, what kind of input minerals do you have? What is their potentials? What are the risks or side effects? And so on. What do we know? What don't we know? And then look at the whole removal process, what would be needed, and then also with respect to the storage part. And what we are currently working on to come up with specific geospatial layers that we combine, for example, that you have data on where mineral deposits that could be used or minerals that could be used for these methods, where are suitable deployment sites, What about transport infrastructure? About policy regulation and economic incentives? And then kind of come up or communicate like these priority deployment sites that could be used. And that is then in the sense of developing a portfolio of methods. Coming from there, so this has been like a bit of the past, and now again, once the agreement is signed with CAUS, we can finally really start. We have like three major project objectives and respective measurements. So the first objective is to develop a user-oriented web platform in co-design with stakeholders via the stakeholder engagement, the implementation of a robust, transparent, and up-to-date global data infrastructure, and the applied visualizations of robust and up-to-date scientific findings. Very important is transparency for sure, but also how do we ensure next to data quality, but how do we ensure that after the project has ended, we don't end up with a monotemporal product that nobody will use. So we have to find ways to keep the atlas as up to date as possible. And don't know if I've mentioned that, sorry. So once the agreement is signed, the project will run until end of 25, and CAUS already committed to maintain the platform for at least 3 years. But of course, this has to be evaluated. If we only have 2 users, it probably doesn't make sense. Another objective is then the third one is like to increase the project scope and attract further data providers via outreach and discussion. To get a bit more into the measurements, so for the stakeholder engagement, we have two major stakeholder groups. First is the target group, being again international organizations, NGOs, ministries, but also economic actors. And on the data provider side, being the second group, we have, for example, CAUS, GEOMA, and the climate map. CAUS, or Colors to Arte, currently runs a G20 research program entitled Pushing the Boundaries of Nature-Based Solutions from Local to Global Opportunities. Here at GEOMA, we have an EU project called OceanNet that looks at the feasibility of the large-scale deployment of various marine-based negative emission technologies, but also nature-based solutions, and is then related to the sister projects Landmark and NAGAM that also look either at terrestrial methods or marine-based ones. Then we have CDR Mare here at GEOMA that is coordinated by the head of the biogeochemical modeling group I'm part of. This is like the mission has formed under the German Alliance of Marine Research. So in Germany, we have like 16 states. Some are aligned along the North Sea, some are along the Baltic Sea, and these have formed the alliance in order to foster marine research. And within or under this umbrella, we have like the CDR Mare, Marine Carbon Sinks for Decarbonization Pathways, consisting of 6 sub-projects that look, for example, at ocean alkalinization or other negative emission technologies, and also on nature-based solutions such as mangrove restoration and others. And then we have CDR Sintra that is highly linked to CDR Mare, that is coordinated by the University of Munich. And this looks at terrestrial methods, also nature and technically based. And in the end, it's supposed to be really synthesized. So it's a really interesting project and runs until just started end of last year and is supposed to run for 8 years. And then we have C-Store, that is also a project running at GEOMA where they try to assess how seagrass meadows can be restored. And there are some test sites here in the Kiel Bay in the Baltic. And then Climate Map that again develops these end-to-end pathways of various negative emission technologies. So this is going to be fed into the atlas. But there are many others that already have intended to either provide data and or take part in the planned co-design process. Although for sure it has to be pointed out that with some we need to, more closely discuss on how this collaboration will be possible, because sometimes for sure there are also some resources needed. With these stakeholders I just showed, I'm going to form a stakeholder reference group. And then we want to, based on the solid prototypes I have shown, so they're going to be more sophisticated. And once we agree that these are solid, we're going to start this co-design process, probably mainly via virtual mini workshops. also depending on how the pandemic develops. But there we really want to specify the requirements of both users and data providers and come up with a scientific technical proof of concept that is then used for the technical realization. I've already conducted an online survey back in 2020, which I globally distributed, and got very interesting insights on what would be needed content-wise, but also with respect to functionalities of the atlas. With respect to the technical implementation, a very challenging part will be the data harmonization. That will be done by here GeoMar, data management team at GeoMar. So that is really, I think, a really huge task, but very interesting and but needs to be done. And then we go in for the production of the atlas, use the proof of concept. Basic functions are the controlled up and download of data. So there's going to be a standardized data interface and where people can contribute data and download for sure with respect to policy regulations. And then lifecycle management, probably better entitled as living data repository. This is like what we need to include is on how to really keep that updated with respect to nature-based solutions. I think so far that is going to be easier. The idea is here, if somebody has contributed data, it's going to give them a timestamp. And then, for example, if you have provided data a year ago, the system automatically asks you, hey, a year ago you have provided data, do you want to update or extend on that? But for sure, there's going to be this has to be more conceptualized, so that's going to be one of the major tasks that we're going to tackle. And then for sure, we're going to have better user testings before the atlas would be launched. Another very important part is the visibility of data contributing stakeholders. So everybody contributing is supposed to be visible on an overview map. So for example, if you would zoom in, probably you would get the logo and then a pop-up box with relevant information on projects and publications and so on. Also something that needs to be then defined and improved within the co-design process. For outreach and discussion, so in order to increase the scope of the MBS Atlas and attract further data providers, we have several activities. So we're going to have PR and social media presence and policy briefs, networking and use of existing communication channels, the presentation of the MBS or of the Atlas at relevant conferences and workshops, and also have scientific publications. And this is also something I didn't mention before, but this would be also very important in my view to have the thing, the whole methodology of the Atlas peer reviewed before launching that. Maybe not so interesting, but some success indicators, quantitative and qualitative ones. Just to give an example for the quantitative side, so participating research institutes, NGOs that kind of form the stakeholder reference group is supposed to be between 25 and 35. And on the qualitative side, one very interesting outcome would be a data harmonization guide for nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies. For the timeline and milestones, excuse me here, this is wrong. This has to be end of 25. So it's a bit misleading here, but just to give you a summary of the milestones. So we're going to have like an Atlas roadmap meeting pretty soon in order to heavily discuss on how to proceed, especially content-wise. There's going to be a kickoff event. Then here we have the requirement and specification and the proof of concept. Harmonization of the data, implementation of the lifecycle management, better user tests with integrated feedback function, the scientific publication, the launch, and its continuation. And as this is a very ambitious project, I also suppose that we won't have everything done until the end of 25, but hopefully we have achieved a lot. Resources needed with what we already have, we would need like another 1.5 million would be good to have, but we can also work without, but still that's something that we are looking for. And some base funding is like just for stuff here, GeoMar, yeah, in order to cover personal expenses. So our vision that we have with the global MBS and Nets Atlas is to make developing up-to-date scientific findings and data on CO2 removal potentials available and applicable, provide action-oriented information for strategic decisions in the context of the agreed Paris climate targets, and therefore have an important contribution to the development of viable climate protection strategies. If you're interested in contributing or have other questions, please contact me. I'm happy to yeah, to meet and discuss. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fabian. Um, so now we are gonna move. We have enough time
I
for
hope I wasn't too quick and
no.
everybody could follow.
Yeah, like I think this is good for like then there's hopefully we have enough time to go over any questions, discussion. Um, So I'm gonna go to like I see a question on the chat box, but also like we're gonna give the opportunity for anyone that wants to like just unmute themselves and make any questions or comments directly to Fabian or to the group that they can do. But we have here Michelle Kanik from the Nature Conservancy that asks if how will this atlas that you're presenting complement with other efforts that are similar, and she included a couple of links here to nature-based solutions initiatives.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I think we, we're trying to really synthesizing, and for example, with Nature Conservancy, I already have been in contact with Elizabeth McLeod, because there's also, for example, the Ocean Wells Explorer, which has a lot of interesting data. But I think for all platforms, there are currently a lot of open questions that needs to be addressed and filled. So, what we are trying to do is really synthesizing and also kind of have a platform for the research that we are conducting at either KAUST or GeoMar, and then hopefully have more contributions that we can, synthesize and communicate this to decision makers and economic actors.
Thank you, Fabian, and Michelle, and anyone. If you want to follow up, feel free. You can use the chat, but you can also unmute and follow up. I have a couple of other questions here. You mentioned we were talking about Nature Conservancy. Now we have here someone from the World Resources Institute, WRI. They have similar platforms. For example, Global Forest Watch. And Joanne.
Yes, that's very interesting. And I had a meeting with Fritz Dollar on this. We talked about this and hopefully have a follow-up meeting soon in order to see if there can be links, for example, to Global Forest Watch or other databases. So what we're really trying to do is not to reinvent the wheel, but we really want to synthesize and then in kind of a new approach try to have this multi-method perspective on nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies, which is a very sensitive issue. But that's, that's also why we really want to have this co-design process or plan for this or go for this co-design process, because I think it needs to be also discussed and developed on how to approach the outer academia world with all of these informations, uncertainties, or gaps we have, right, with respect to these methods that are on the table.
Great. So you just answered the question from Johannes Frederick that he's from WRI, basically asking if you were in contact with them and asking if you can share the slides with them. And Johannes, we're gonna, as always, we're gonna upload these slides and we'll have the recording of the talk in our website, carbon.nasa.gov. You can expect that for the end of this week or early next week. Um, we have a couple of other questions. Shortly, I'm gonna give the opportunity. We have enough time, for people to make
Yes, sure.
their questions or comments directly, so we can have more of a discussion. But we have a question here from one of the CMS principal investigators, Ben Runkle, and he asks, "Can you describe some of the changes you have had or anticipate in response to the stakeholder input?"
I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry. Could you repeat that?
If you could describe some of the changes that you have had already or that you anticipate in response to the stakeholder input.
The challenges or changes?
Changes. Or it can also be challenges.
Uh, yeah, I mean yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I mean, when I started this and approached ministries and others here in Germany in order to get data and contributions and also ask for, them to join the co-design process, I thought this is never possible. But when I kind of was everybody I've been talking to so far, respect with the specific ministry in Germany, everybody was very open-minded, and also really saw or sees this need for this platform that you have this multi-method assessment or spatial differential assessment and bringing everything together, synthesizing this. So they had I think it's everybody saw that this is really needed, but challenge for sure would be in the end, it might not be enough to have an intent that they provide data and or take part in the co-design process. So it really then, for sure, there will be some that do not or will not contribute. But I hope that we have enough strong stakeholders that really are willing to do so. And what else? No, despite that, I was really astonished how open and interested everybody was, and also everybody gave very constructive comments and so on. So this debate on this or this exchange with various stakeholders has been very interesting.
Thank you, Fabian.
Don't know if I really answered the question. Sorry if I haven't.
We can, if you know, Ben, if you want to follow up, you're more than we're more than happy for you to follow up. If not, Robert, uh, thank you, Ben. Robert Cormia, if you have a question here, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself. um,
Yes, first, thank you very much for this presentation. As you folks know, I have an interest in large-scale climate restoration and using satellite and other observatory to monitor carbon fluxes. So this is moving in
Brilliant.
this direction. Could you speak to the long-term, large-scale strategic carbon reduction goals and where natural solutions fits in to that? And how
Well, I
you would
mean,
use observatories to create that.
yes, I mean that's something that we're currently discussing on how to tackle this. I mean, what we would like to do is that in the Atlas also have like kind of the status quo presented, but when it comes to potentials and restoration, here at GeoMar, for example, we have developed a new Earth system model that has regional nesting included, and we're working very closely with field scientists that work on salt marshes, that also have been closely working with the Smithsonian Institute, and there they're kind of developing on how sequestration could change under different climate conditions. So this is something that we're going to tackle. And I think what is also a very important part is when it comes to nature-based solutions, I mean, if this is supposed to work with respect to monitoring and verification. And to be honest, we didn't really come up with the solution yet on how to include this in the atlas, especially with respect to on how to communicate this in order to avoid miscommunication. Um, but again, because again, I see really here the sensitive issue of having nature-based solution and negative emission technologies. So we have to be very careful on how to communicate that. For example, a user then um, summarizes this as we need to go for negative emissions only because nature-based solutions is not of importance with respect to carbon sequestration. So this is a very important issue, and how to include this long term. Yeah, I mean we have some ideas, but this is like here at Juma also then really part of the just starting research that we have within all of these projects, and also something that we've definitely heavily discussed as Carlos has more the lead on nature-based solutions in this project with his experience and G20 program on nature-based solutions. So yeah, I can't really answer that, but we are aware that this is a very important issue to cover. So if you have ideas and could share your expertise, would be very happy.
I will be reaching out to you as well as the Federation for Climate Restoration,
Great,
Foundation
thank you so
for
much.
Climate Rest. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. And also, Fabian, I'll send you the chat after the talk because there's also some comments. And Johnson mentions that one resource that exists is the Living Atlas from Esri, and mapping solutions such as ArcGIS Online. Um, Aaron Fuller has a question. Do you have a website that shares updates, progress, and publications? And do you perform any life cycle assessment analysis in your work that show benefits for nature based solutions over technical solutions?
First of all, we don't have a website yet, but this is supposed to be hopefully set up latest end of February, where we can share updates. And yeah, I also going to send around newsletters, so would be very good if you could contact me so that I can send that to you. But also maybe I can also send that to you, Edil, and you can share that. And the other question was, sorry. Um,
Do you perform any?
Life cycle assessment, yes.
Yes.
Yes, that is very interesting. We are planning to do so, and I've been in contact with Kristen Davis from UC Irvine that works, for example, on seaweed. And I forgot the name now, but somebody from Göteborg University in Sweden. And we have a follow-up meeting in order to discuss on how we could integrate this. So again, also if you're interested, please contact and we see we can talk about this in more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, this might be a bit confusing. The thing is that um, content-wise, we have tons of ideas and already, really worked on this, but we really need to more heavily kind of really specify and focus on how really we start this. And again, we also really need to come up with these solid prototypes and then our long-term strategy for the Atlas. And this is something that we're going to discuss very soon in several workshops that we have with KAUST. But also, so again, if you're interested, please contact me and I will share all the information I have.
Thank you, Fabian. We have a couple more questions. Brian Moorhead asked if you could describe further the nature of what you're calling data harmonization.
Yes. I mean, with all the different data sets on nature-based solutions and negative emission technologies, I mean, if we want to bring it into the Atlas and make it somehow comparable, I mean, you have to find at least the one common denominator or even more. And I mean, we have to think of cartography, metadata, and really think through what kind of what is really needed and how do we harmonize the data in order to have it all included if we really look at various methods and also different I like methods meaning either nature-based or negative emission technologies, but also how these data has been gained either by modeling or observations. So I think one really has to be clear on how to structure all the different data sets.
Okay, one more question, and then we can open it to whoever has wants to make questions or comments directly to the group or to Fabian. We did have someone from Nature Conservancy, then from World Resources Institute, and now we also have here from the Environmental Defense Fund (EDF), Jamie Collins. Um, Jamie, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and comment on this and make the
Sure.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks to the CMS program for hosting this. And Fabian, thank you for the great presentation. This looks like a really cool initiative. I look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing it develop. I just had a question about curation here. We know that there are some really large scientific uncertainties, particularly surrounding the blue carbon pathways. In some cases, we don't really even know whether these systems are net sources or sinks. In the case of mangroves, particularly talking about methane emissions with disturbance history of particular systems, et cetera, right? So I'm curious, and then particularly in the open ocean with something like macroalgae or even some of the more ecosystem-based pathways, MRV is going to be a huge challenge, right? Because we can't, we only see the top centimeter with passive remote sensing of ocean water. So as we all know, how are you guys going to curate the atlas, right? So as you take in information about projects or potential extent of total systems that might contribute in a particular nature-based solutions pathway, who and how are you sort of thinking about deciding what gets ingested? Because I think that there's a risk here, right, of ingesting some misleading information
You mean with respect to data quality, right?
well, right, data quality or just like the even extent, right, or potential extent is really uncertain in some of these cases. And I mean, that German, for example, that German Environment Agency report, right, which suggests that we some have overestimated the potential extent of some of these solutions at their full deployment. So I'm just curious whether you're
Yeah,
thinking about
yeah.
how to
No,
control
that's a very interesting point that really gives me sleepless nights. Because first of all, we thought, okay, if we have like a standardized data interface where people can upload, we have like a Creative Commons license. But then, for sure, how do you deal with very bad and misleading data? I mean, for sure, if you upload, you can have like a specific guideline and a data preview in order to avoid just kind of mistakes. But if it's really bad data, so we were thinking of, having like a feedback function that, for example, for the mangrove community, I don't know if you're aware or if you know Martin Zimmer from ZMT here in Germany that works on mangrove restoration. He mentioned, for example, that's like a comparatively small community. So we were thinking of, making him a referee in order that they kind of peer review data that is uploaded to the atlas. Or we then thought of that, people can flag that data and you're going to check that. But we didn't come up with the final solution yet. So this is also something that is that we are discussing and seeing how we can really assure that we don't have any misleading data on there. But and this is even, I think, more difficult for negative emission technologies. So there we were like of thinking revising it together with, for example, the climate map and maybe other strong partners where we know that they are producing scientific findings to their best knowledge. So a very, very important point, and can't give you the final solution yet. So if somebody has an idea, please let me know on how this could work best in practice. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you. It did. And I would just encourage you to think, it sounds like you are, and I encourage you to double down your efforts, think very hard about how to control
Yes.
for data. I mean, there's a big risk with this stuff, right? Of delegitimizing some of these
And I
natural
mean, we
climate
also,
solutions that are
if
putting bad
you
data
have
out
so
there.
many stakeholders contributing, I mean, for sure, I mean, especially in the beginning, I mean, like solid types will be based mainly on data from GeoMar and KAUST and the climate map, and for sure also all the others that we know that do produce good scientific work. And yeah, from there on, if we really, step by step fill the atlas and are more sure where this things really leads us in the end, I think then we until then we will have a solution on how to deal with that.
Thank you, Fabian, and thank you, Jamie, for that, for the comments and questions. I would also like reiterate. I mentioned it at the beginning of the talk, but in case that people, some people were not present, we have next week. We have been working on this applied Earth observation um, innovation partnership between some of the NASA Earth science missions and some of the other land management federal government agencies like U.S. Forest Service. And we're going to be having a workshop in the coming months, but next week we're going to be having a webinar, and it's going to be focused on mangroves and blue carbon and estimated total carbon in blue carbon ecosystems. And we're going to have NASA scientist Lola Fatoyimbo talking about the products that she has been developing worldwide regarding mangrove distribution, above ground biomass, canopy height maps. And we're going to have Carl Trettin that has been working with her on the applications of these data products. So in case that you're interested, I'll be sending to our listserv the announcement later today for that. So we have a couple of other questions and we have like 10 minutes left. So Emerson Cirque has asked, how do you anticipate this tool being used by policymakers for both local and global scales?
Yes, I mean, I'm not 100% sure if regional or local governments will really use this. But it's really more about being clearer on if you have like the global to local scales that you can really kind of develop this portfolio of methods and have this high resolution level where you can really find where and how would make or where and which method would make sense. So I think it's of most importance that people that really have an influence on the strategic development have this different levels of information. And when they specifically look, for example, somebody that is looking at how to get Germany carbon neutral and looks at possibilities, this will be then rather top down at some specific point. Also, I mean, that would be the case in Germany. I don't know how it really works in the US, but if they would decide this would be a message to really consider, then smaller ministries or on a smaller level would be contacted and be integrated into that process.
Thank you. We have a couple of other questions, but I just wanted to we have a couple of minutes left. Just open it if someone has any questions or comments that you want to do directly to Fabian or to the group. Feel free. If not, we have these questions, a couple of questions. Will you include technical evaluations of a specific projects against historical baselines?
Say that again, please.
If will you include technical evaluations of a specific projects against the historical baselines?
We haven't considered that so far. So if the person that raises the question thinks that could be of interest and sees ways to connect, please get in contact and be happy to discuss this.
Yes, and yeah, I think like these SHBCCs. I don't know if you want to unmute. Uh, and make the questions directly to Fabian? If not, Fabian, there is the last question that I have here is like, are all matters of geographical variation in implementation costs and social issues left to the stakeholders?
No, this is also ongoing research here within the project I have mentioned. And we're also working closely together with the University of Kiel, especially with the geographic department. And they are looking at this, and also so make use of their expertise. But also, I mean, this is something that we also kind of, prepare then for the co-design process in order to get insights from the stakeholders outside of academia, for example.
Thank you, Fabian. Any last questions, comments?
But maybe to add on this, but what I'm really looking for is to make this platform of use to potential users. So what is really or supposed to come in the end from the stakeholders or from potential users is to really that we understand and specify their requirements in order to get better insights into the methods that I have mentioned, but also to really be able to work with this and better understand what are the possibilities and how could the portfolio of methods look like.
Thank you. Any final questions, comments from the group?
Let's get going on this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, it's really needed. Very difficult and ambitious, but really needed and exciting.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I posted the Fabian's email on the chat and also the link where you're going to be able to download the slides from today and also watch the recording. So again, if you want to follow up with Fabian, you have the email. If you want to follow up with me, you have my email. Any recommendations or suggestions on topics that you want to hear in this policy speaker series, please let me know. Thank you again, Fabian, for your time. And
Thank
everyone.
you. I have to be very thankful to all of you for your time and your attention. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.